On the assembly line of a Toyota plant, there is a cord that runs the length of the factory. Any worker can reach up and pull it. The moment they do, a light flashes, a chime sounds, and if no one fixes the problem in the next 60 seconds, the entire line stops. Thousands of cars, hundreds of workers. All of it grinds to a halt because one person saw something wrong. In almost any other factory on Earth, a worker who stopped the line would be fired. At Toyota, a worker who saw a defect and did not stop the line, that is the one who gets in trouble. This single idea sounds backwards. Slowing down to go faster, trusting the lowest paid person on the floor with the most expensive button in the building. And yet this idea, and a handful of others like it, turned a bankrupt Loom company into the largest car maker in human history. This is the story of how Toyota built the machine that builds the machine. Today, Toyota builds more than 10 million vehicles a year. It has sold more cars than any other company on the planet, in more countries, for longer than anyone thought possible. But the part that should stop you is not the cars. It is that the way Toyota builds them rewrote how the entire world makes things. Hospitals use it to move patients. Airlines use it to turn planes around. Software companies call it agile. Startups call it lean. Amazon, Boeing, the factory that made the phone in your pocket, they are all running a version of one idea that came out of a single Japanese company that, for most of its early life, was broke. Because Toyota did not start as a car maker. It started as a company that made looms for weaving cloth. It had no money, no steel, no market, and a country that had just lost a war. On paper, it should not exist. If you want to understand how impossible things actually get built, stay with this one. To see how a loom became the blueprint for modern industry, we have to go back to a workshop in rural Japan. It begins with a man named Sakichi Toyoda. Born in 1867, the son of a poor carpenter in a farming village, he grew up watching his mother work a hand loom late into the night. It was slow, exhausting work. A single broken thread, unnoticed, could ruin hours of weaving. So Sakichi set out to build a better loom. He had no formal engineering education. He taught himself, breaking machines apart and rebuilding them, failing for years. But he was chasing something specific. He did not just want a faster loom, he wanted a loom that was honest, one that would not keep weaving once something had gone wrong. In 1924, he succeeded. His automatic loom did something no machine had done before. The instant a single thread snapped, the loom stopped itself. It did not weave a flawed bolt of cloth. It froze, and it signaled for help. Sakichi called the principle jidoka, roughly, automation with a human touch. A machine smart enough to know when it had a problem. That idea, that a machine should stop the moment something is wrong, rather than quietly produce garbage, is the seed of everything that comes next. It just took another generation, and a far bigger machine, to grow it. Sakichi had a son, Kiichiro. And Kiichiro looked at the family's successful loom business and saw something his father could not have imagined. He saw automobiles. In the 1930s, Japan barely made cars. The roads were dominated by Fords and Chevrolets, assembled in Japanese plants by American companies. Detroit had a 30-year head start, oceans of capital, and the most advanced factories on Earth. For a loom maker to challenge that was, by any reasonable measure, madness. Kiichiro did it anyway. He sold the rights to his father's automatic loom patent to a British firm and used the money to fund a new division. He sent engineers to tear down American engines bolt by bolt and learn how they worked. He built his first prototype engine in 1934, and it was not good. The early cars overheated, broke down, and came back to the dealers in pieces. But Kiichiro kept pouring the loom fortune into the problem. In 1937, he spun the car division off into its own company. He changed the spelling of the family name slightly, from Toyota to Toyota. Cleaner to write, and it took 8 brush strokes, considered a lucky number. Toyota Motor Corporation was born, a tiny car maker betting everything against the giants of Detroit. And then the world went to war. By 1945, Japan lay in ruins. Cities were ash. The economy had collapsed. Toyota had spent the war building trucks for the military, and now there was no military, no money, and almost no one who could afford a car. The company limped through the next few years on the edge of collapse. Then, in 1950, it ran out of road. Toyota could not pay its bills. The banks agreed to a rescue, but only on brutal terms. Slash the workforce, restructure everything. When the layoffs came, the workers went on strike. For 2 months, the company tore itself apart. In the end, around 2,000 employees lost their jobs, and Kiichiro Toyoda, the man who had bet the family fortune on cars, took responsibility for the failure and resigned. He would die 2 years later, at 57, never seeing what his company would become. This was rock bottom. A broke car maker in a broke country, having just gutted its own workforce, with no clear way to compete against the richest factories on the planet. What saved it, barely, was an accident of history. The Korean War broke out, and the United States military placed a large order for trucks. It was a lifeline. But a lifeline is not a strategy. Toyota still had to figure out how to build cars with almost nothing, and the man who would crack that problem was already inside the building. His name was Taiichi Ohno, and he was an engineer who had come over from the Loom side of the business. In the early 1950s, Toyota's leadership gave him an impossible assignment. American factories were estimated to be roughly 9 times more productive than Japanese ones. Ohno was told to close that gap, catch up to Ford. But here was the problem. He could not do it the way Ford did it. Ford's genius was scale, build one model in enormous quantities, stamp out thousands of identical parts, and stockpile huge inventories so the line never stopped. That worked when you had cheap land, cheap steel, deep capital, and a giant market hungry for cars. Toyota had none of those things. It had a cramped factory, almost no cash, and a small home market that needed lots of different vehicles in small numbers: trucks, sedans, cars for narrow streets. If Ohno copied Ford, the warehouses full of parts Toyota could not afford would bankrupt the company a second time. So Ohno asked a different question. Not how do we make this cheaper by making more, but what if we built only exactly what we needed, exactly when we needed it, and nothing else? It sounded almost too simple. Working out what it actually meant would take him the next 20 years. The answer came, of all places, from an American grocery store. Ohno had heard about the way supermarkets in the United States worked, and the idea stuck in his head. In a supermarket, the shelves are not stuffed full from a giant back room. The customer takes a can off the shelf, and only then does a worker come and put one more can in its place. The shelf is refilled by what is actually taken. Nothing is stocked until something is sold. Demand pulls the goods through the store. Ohno realized this was the inversion he had been looking for. Traditional mass production pushes, the factory builds as much as it can and shoves it forward, hoping it sells, piling up inventory at every step. Ohno's idea was to flip the arrow. Let the final step, the customer the next station down the line, pull what it needs from the step before it. Each part of the factory only makes what the next part has just taken. Build only what is needed, only when it is needed, only in the amount needed. He called it just in time. To run it, his team invented a deceptively simple tool, a card, called a Kanban, that traveled back up the line as a signal. When a station used up its parts, the card went back and said, in effect, send exactly this many more. No card, no parts. The warehouses emptied out. The flood of inventory that would have drowned Toyota simply never had to exist. A grocery shelf had just become the operating system for the most efficient factory in the world. But just-in-time had a terrifying weakness. If you carry no spare inventory, a single defective part can stop everything. There is no warehouse of good parts to grab instead. So the system only works if the parts are almost never bad. This is where Ohno reached back to Sakichi's Loom, the machine that stopped itself when a thread broke. He brought jidoka onto the car line, and this is the chord from the very start of our story. Every worker on the line was given the power and the duty to pull it the instant they saw a defect. Stop the line, bring everyone to the problem, fix it where it happened, right now. In Detroit, the philosophy was the opposite. Keep the line moving at all costs. Catch the defects later, at the end, with a small army of inspectors who would pull bad cars aside and rework them. Toyota saw that as insane. Every defect you pass downstream gets harder and more expensive to fix. And the same mistake just keeps happening. Stopping the line looks slower, it feels slower. A stopped line is making no cars, but by forcing the problem to be solved at its source, the defect stops recurring. Over weeks and months, the line stops less and less, because the things that used to break it have been permanently fixed. Quality is not inspected in at the end, it is built in at every step. The slow way turned out to be the fast way. There is a habit underneath all of this, and it has a name, Kaizen. It means continuous improvement, and it is less a technique than a way of thinking. The idea is that no process is ever finished. Every day, the people who do the work look for small ways to make it a little better. A tool moved 6 inches closer, a step removed, a motion made safer. Not a single dramatic overhaul from the top, but thousands of tiny refinements from the bottom, every week, for decades. When something went wrong, Ohno taught his people to ask why 5 times. The machine stopped. Why? A part failed. Why? It wore out early. Why? It was not lubricated. Why? The pump was clogged. Why? There was no filter. Fix the symptom, and it breaks again next week. Ask why 5 times, and you find the real cause. And this is the part that outsiders kept missing. The Toyota system was never really about machines or cards or cords. It was about respect for the people doing the work. Toyota assumed the person on the line knew more about that job than any executive ever would, and built the entire system to capture what they knew. The engineers gave the line its tools, but the workers, asking why, fixing what they saw, made it better every single day. The machine that builds the machine was, in the end, made of people. Piece by piece, decade by decade, it started to work. By the 1960s, Toyota was building cars with a fraction of the inventory of its competitors. Where an American plant might hold weeks of parts, Toyota held hours. Where Detroit needed sprawling warehouses, Toyota needed almost none. The factory used less space, less cash, less time, and turned out cars with fewer defects. Studies done years later would put hard numbers on the gap. A Toyota plant could assemble a car in roughly half the labor hours of a comparable American one, with far fewer defects per vehicle, in a fraction of the factory space. The company that had nearly gone bankrupt was now, quietly, the most efficient manufacturer on the planet. And the cars were good, reliable, affordable, well-built. In Japan, Toyota became the dominant car maker. But Ohno's system had created something the company could not keep at home. It had created a structural advantage, the ability to build better cars for less money than anyone else alive. A weapon like that does not stay in one country. The only question was where Toyota would point it first. The answer was the largest, richest, most car-obsessed market on Earth. The answer was the United States. And Detroit had absolutely no idea what was coming. Then history handed Toyota the opening of a lifetime. In 1973, an oil embargo sent fuel prices through the roof. Overnight, the American love affair with the giant gas-guzzling sedan turned into a problem. Drivers waited in lines that stretched around the block, and they suddenly wanted something they had never wanted before. Small, cheap, reliable cars that sipped gas instead of swallowing it. Detroit did not have them. Toyota did. The Corolla and its cousins poured into the United States. Compact, dependable, affordable, and built to a standard of quality American buyers were not used to. Sales exploded, and when a second oil shock hit at the end of the decade, the flood became a tidal wave. Detroit panicked. American carmakers watched their market share collapse and could not understand how a company from a country they had defeated 30 years earlier was now beating them on their own soil. They assumed it had to be cheating, cheap labor, government subsidies, dumping cars below cost. Washington forced through trade restrictions, quotas limiting how many cars Japan could ship. But the restrictions missed the point entirely. Toyota was not winning on cheap labor. It was winning on a way of building things that Detroit did not understand and could not see. The cars were just the visible part. The real machine was hidden inside the factory. In 1984 came the experiment that settled the argument. General Motors and Toyota opened a joint factory in Fremont, California, called NUMMI. The location was loaded with meaning. GM had run a plant on that exact site, and it had been one of the worst in the entire company. Terrible quality, rampant absenteeism, drinking on the job, a workforce so hostile that wildcat strikes were routine. GM had shut it down. Now Toyota reopened it, and here was the catch. They hired back the same workers, the same union, many of the same people GM had called unmanageable. The only thing that changed was the system. Toyota brought in just in time the andon cord, Kaizen, and the radical idea that the workers' knowledge mattered. Within about 2 years, that same workforce, in that same building, was producing cars at the highest quality level in all of General Motors, rivaling the plants back in Japan. The lesson could not have been clearer. The problem at the old plant had never been the workers. It was the system they were trapped in. Give people a system that respects them and lets them fix what they see, and they will give you greatness. GM had a front row seat to its own answer. And yet, for decades, even with the playbook handed to them, American car makers struggled to truly copy it. Because the hardest part to copy was never the chords or the cards. It was the trust. By the 1990s, Toyota was no longer the underdog. It was a giant, and giants usually stop taking risks. Toyota did the opposite. In 1993, it launched a secret project to design the car of the 21st century. The brief was almost absurd. Build a vehicle that used dramatically less fuel, with a technology that barely existed. The engineers landed on a hybrid, pairing a gasoline engine with an electric motor and a battery, a combination most of the industry considered impractical and far too expensive. They built it anyway. The Prius launched in Japan in 1997 and reached the world soon after. And here's the part that echoes Kiichiro's original bet. Toyota almost certainly lost money on every early Prius it sold. The technology was costly, the market was tiny, and rivals openly scoffed that nobody wanted it. But Toyota had spent its entire existence building things the market did not know it needed yet. The Prius became the best-selling hybrid on Earth and the symbol of an entire shift in how the world thought about cars. The willingness to bet on a machine for a future that had not arrived, that was not new. It was the same instinct that sold a Loom patent to fund automobiles 60 years earlier. And then the machine met its hardest test. In 2009 and 2010, reports spread of Toyotas accelerating on their own, cars that would not slow down. It was every driver's nightmare, attached to the brand that had built its entire identity on reliability. Toyota recalled millions of vehicles around the world. The company that obsessed over quality was now the face of a global quality scandal. The cause turned out to be a tangle of floor mats, sticky pedals, and fierce dispute over the electronics, but the damage to trust was immediate and brutal. Akio Toyoda, the founder's grandson, now running the company, was called before the United States Congress. He sat in front of the cameras and admitted in plain terms that Toyota had grown too fast and had let its legendary discipline slip. That confession was telling, because the company's response was not to invent something new, it was to go back to its own oldest principles. Stop the line, find the real root cause, not the convenient one. And above all, a rule Ohno had drilled for decades. Genshi Genbutsu, go and see for yourself. Do not manage the problem from a conference room. Walk to where the work happens and look with your own eyes. The crisis nearly broke Toyota's reputation. What pulled it back was the very system that had built it. Here is the strangest part of the whole story. The Toyota production system did not stay at Toyota. It did not even stay in the car industry. Scholars studied it, wrote books about it, and renamed it Lean, and then it escaped into the rest of the world. Hospitals adopted it to cut the time patients wait and the errors that hurt them. Software teams turned it into agile development, building in small increments and fixing problems immediately instead of at the end. Silicon Valley repackaged it as the lean startup, build only what the customer actually pulls, learn fast, waste nothing. Amazon, airlines, the supply chains behind nearly everything you own, all run on ideas that trace back to Ohno walking a factory floor in post-war Japan. Think about where this came from. Not from the richest company, with the most resources and the freedom to experiment. It came from a near-bankrupt loom maker that could not afford to waste a single part, in a country that had lost everything. The constraint did not limit the invention. The constraint was the invention. Toyota had so little that it was forced to discover how to make the most out of almost nothing. And that lesson turned out to be worth more than all the steel and capital Detroit ever had. Go back to that cord on the assembly line. The one any worker can pull to stop everything. It traces straight back to a loom in a village workshop, more than a century ago. A machine that stopped itself when a single thread broke, built by a self-taught carpenter's son who only wanted to make his mother's work a little easier. A loom company that should never have built a car maker that nearly went bankrupt and laid off its own people. A factory with no money, no space, and no way to copy the giants, that turned its own poverty into the most copied way of building things in human history. Toyota did not win because it had more. It won because it had less, and refused to waste any of it. The machine that builds the machine was never really the assembly line. It was a way of thinking, that the person closest to the work knows best, that every problem is a chance to improve, and that you build quality in rather than inspect it at the end. From a single broken thread, Toyota built an empire from nothing. If you want to see how more impossible things actually got built, subscribe.